Hi. Thanks for having us. So I'm Lindsay Cole, the Greenest City Planner, and Cornellia Sussmann is our Greenest City Scholar on the Lighter Footprint Working Group. So I'm also lucky enough to be convening the Lighter Footprint Working Group in addition to the other Greenest City stuff that I'm doing. We're here to talk a little bit about what we've been doing with that so far. So we're going to give you a bit of background on what the footprint is and how it's measured, because it's not consistently kind of understood. We've learned in our citywide surveying on that. And then we'll talk a little bit about our targets and some of the strategies that are coming out of our work so far. So the long-term goal is to achieve a one planet ecological footprint, and Cornelia is going to talk about a little bit about what that actually means.
So there's two things I'd like to just talk about, which is the first is what is an ecological footprint and what would a one planet ecological footprint be. So an ecological footprint's a concept developed by Bill Reese out at UBC. And what it is, it's a measure, it's a physical land area measure of the productive land and sea that it would take to support a population. So to provide the goods that we use and to absorb the waste we create on an annual basis. So, and what we do is the footprint is broken up into land areas. It's measured in land areas. How much forest land on the planet does it take to support Vancouver's population for a year? How much energy land? And energy land is actually calculated as it's forest land that will absorb our CO2 emissions. How much pasture land to grow the various forms of meat that we eat, cropland. We also measure built area land, and then there's also a measure of bioproductive sea, of how much sea space for the fish and so on. A couple of studies that have been done suggest that Vancouver's footprint is somewhere between about 5 and 6 global hectares per capita. So for each average Vancouverite, somewhere on the planet, there's about between 5 and 6 hectares of land required to produce the goods that we would eat and use in a year. What's a one planet footprint? What's the globally available number of hectares? Divide that by the population. You get somewhere around 2 hectares per person on the planet. So if Vancouverites are using on average somewhere like 5.5 hectares, we're using up an amount that somebody else doesn't have access to somewhere else on the planet. So there's also kind of an idea of a fair Earth share. So the 2 hectare target, the one planet target, what would a fair use of the Earth's resources be? So that's the long-term goal that's been given. When you're looking at a city and you want to do a city footprint, we're actually working with a doctoral student at UBC, Jenny Moore, is working on a city-specific footprint, and these don't exist yet. They don't exist. They normally exist at the national level, not the city level. This is very rough breakdown. It's just to give you a sense of the components. When you're looking at a footprint, food comes out fairly large, waste, transportation, consumables, and buildings. And what you do with these is we try to collect all the data on the different kinds of food that are consumed, fruits, vegetables, meat, etc. Then you do a life cycle analysis of that. And you use that life cycle analysis to then discover again the amount of cropland, pasture land, energy land, so on. And that's how you get your footprint measure. The 2020 target from GCAT is to reduce the footprint, the Vancouver per capita footprint, by approximately 33%, or by 33%, which would be something like going from about 5.5 hectares per person down to about 3.5. And Lindsay's going to talk about where we go from there. Thanks.
So the target we were given was a 33% reduction in ecological footprint by 2020, and we're proposing a second because the first one has lots of issues around data collection and measurability. So no matter we have to make sure that what we're doing in the city around footprint reduction is actually going to read on our calculations, and there are issues there with data availability. And it also, because it's so numbers driven, we felt like we needed another target that was a bit more qualitative and around creating a culture shift, creating a constituency in the city that was ready for policy change around all of the Greenest City actions that we're talking about. And so we're still working with what this target might look like and be. We're thinking of some sort of eco-literacy target, but we're not quite sure exactly how to word it yet to frame what it is. what's a measurable thing that we can track that achieves this purpose. So we'll hopefully add a second target and have a bit more info on that one soon. So we've sent around a telephone survey that we did at the beginning of our Greenest City work. It was completed, I think, in July, and if you haven't seen it, we'd be happy to send it to you. It's really interesting. It tests people's perceptions of different and levels of importance that they ascribe to different Greenest City issues. So one of the questions we asked was around the ecological footprint and what people understood it to be. So the first question is down there: do you know what the term ecological footprint means? And about 60% were aware, and the rest were unaware. But this really interesting thing is, of those that were aware, they probed a little deeper on what their understanding of it was. And given what Cornellia told us, only about 7% of those that are aware of what footprint means actually got it right. So given that a big part of this exercise is about communications around the Greenest City and around footprint reduction, and people don't actually understand what lighter footprint and ecological footprint means, we've got a big challenge in front of us to figure out how to talk about this in the city and in the community in a way that people can grab onto. So that's a big part of shaping that second target. Another really interesting thing about this survey that I'll just throw out there is one of the other questions we asked was what social unit or group is most responsible for taking action. And about 40% of people in the city, their first mention was individuals, so they recognize it as personal responsibility, and the second choice was government. And of those that chose government in their sort of top one or two choices, the City of Vancouver exceeded other levels of government as being responsible for taking action on this stuff. So really interesting for us, I think. And finally, on the footprint metric itself, there was we pulled out the respondents from the Chinese community, because that's about a quarter of our city's population, and the level of awareness in the Chinese community was, I think, around 27% compared to 62% on average. So we're starting to think about how we're going to do this in a culturally sensitive and strategic way, and we're going to need to find different ways of talking about these issues that are embodied in a footprint conversation to different communities in different ways. So we're trying to do our homework and thinking about how we're going to deliver this and work on this and achieve our targets. So some of the challenges are around this work, the lighter footprint work in particular, I think are important for other working groups and others working on these things to know. We really, the numbers are really, really rough, and they will continue to be rough for a while, but we have to move forward with what we've got. And we inputted the targets from the other working groups, and we found that of our 33% target, only about 5 to 10% of that can be achieved by the other working groups' targets. So that's the carbon neutral new construction, the 20% more efficient existing building stock. Food isn't included in that number because they don't yet have a really solid target that we can input. But the way that they're likely to go with their target and their strategies is not going to be a big piece of our footprint reduction. So that's a big challenge. The remaining, a lot of the rest of the work that we need to do to get up to the 33% are things that are typically outside of the city's influence or outside of the things that the city talks about. City doesn't usually talk about changes in diet or changes in consumption habits. There are some things that we can do around regulatory policy-based incentives, that kind of thing, but a lot of it is going to be, getting others to rise to the challenge and rally around this. The other targets don't include consumption of resources. They're focused on greenhouse gas emissions and efficiencies and that kind of thing, which there are very good reasons for that, but it makes our particular work a bit challenging because of that. But we can't be a green city without addressing our footprint. And when we think about the equity issues involved with that, and that the city of Vancouver is the birthplace of the idea of the ecological footprint, I think it's particularly important for us to be thinking about that. So those are some of the challenges that we're facing in our work.